Thank you so much for joining us for today's event. This is another event for the Career Paths event series by the Applied Anthropology Network. And today will be all about system thinking for anthropologists. And we have Rosalie here, Rosalie Post from Namla. She will tell you a bit more about herself very soon, but we're very happy to have her here. I would just hand over to you now, Rosalie. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I made a very boring entrance slide, but welcome. We called this lecture event, I hopefully interactive event, Systems Thinking for Anthropologists. And this is because I would like to tell you about some stuff that I've been thinking about for some few years, actually, and that over my um, career so far has slowly clicked into place for me. And I want to tell you before we start that I have made two versions of the presentation. There is the one that I'm going to show you on the screen, and I might sometimes also skip through it a bit hastily. And then there's a longer one that also contains more comments and more details, and that will also be shared by Applied Anthropology Network. So don't stress too much about writing down what I say or making screenshots. Just focus on getting the concepts, and then the other presentation will be ready for you to dive into at your leisure afterwards. I want to start with a little fact, and it's a bit of a shocking one to some people, and to some people it is not news. I wrote a funding application for the EU last year together with people from Czech Republic, and then I calculated this number. I calculated it by looking at the statistics, how many people graduate from an anthropology degree in the Netherlands every year. That is around 1,000 per year. And then I called a professor at the University of Amsterdam and asked how many paid PhD positions are there per year in the country. And he said around 10. And so that means 1% of us can stay in academia for a PhD. I'm sure that the data differs per country. It's just an example that I happen to have calculated before. But I want you to know that this is where we are starting from. The idea that it is just not feasible for everyone to stay in academia, and it does not say anything about your intelligence or your capitalism or how much you sold out or anything like that if you don't end up there. And so I want to think about together about how can we make change in the world today in this hour, even if an academic position is not granted for you. I want to talk to you about systems thinking. Then we'll have a bit of time for reactions or questions. And then in the second half, we're going to go a lot more down to earth, very concrete job titles that use ethnography. We'll leave some time for discussion, and we'll try to wrap up at 7. Excuse me, I just ate a snack. The world is a wild place sometimes. Who am I? I thought maybe not everybody here knows, so let me just start with that. My name is Rosalie Post. I use also my middle name on LinkedIn because there's many of us out there, Rosalie Anne Post. I have a degree in anthropology and then another degree in anthropology, and then I graduated in 2016. And I then followed working in the housing field for around 7 years. And then in end of 2023, I started working on Namla full-time. You see Namla on the left. It started from an applied anthropology meetup. And today we teach online courses for graduates, and we do a variety of other projects that tend to be like funded by the EU around design anthropology. So that's a little bit about my background. And so I think a lot and with and for young graduates or even older people who are doing a career switch. And these are some of my thoughts that I've been collecting. We're going to start with, I'm going to tell you about systems thinking with Donella Meadows. So Donella Meadows is she passed away around 2001, but she was an environmental scientist her whole life. She taught at many different colleges in the US and I think ended up at MIT. And so she started thinking about ecosystems and how they interact, like the plants and the insects and how they all keep each other alive. And then what she expanded that to thinking about all sorts of systems, like organizations or countries or ways that we interact. So there's kind of over time, she got a link with what anthropologists do, right? Um, I also added a little quote from her. She says, "We can't impose our will on a system. We can listen to what the system tells us and discover how its properties and our values can work together to bring forth something much better than could ever be produced by our will alone." And so she was actually a strong believer in being able to change systems, but she has some very helpful ideas about how we can do that. One of the ways that this is expressed, and I'm going to show you a lot of visuals because this is pretty complex material and visuals can be helpful there, is with the iceberg model. I don't know if you can read all the text in this picture, but you can look at what is happening on the surface, right? The events, and then what's underlying in that. And I think most of us know this, right? Even implicitly because we have been studying culture for a while. Underlying, you have patterns of behavior. Underlying that, you have the structure of the systems. You can even think about bureaucracy and stuff like that. Like, why do we need to fill out this form at this time to get this service? That is a structure that was decided by that. And what was decided, like, even before the structure ever happened, was a mental model, right? Like, what values and assumptions and beliefs shape the system. So her whole theory about how to change systems is that if we can change events, that will have some effect. If we can change patterns of behavior, that will have more effect. Then if we can change structures, that will have even more effect. And finally, if we can really change paradigms, that would have the most effect. Because if you were able to change the mental models that are like on top of the system, you'd be able to shift the whole thing as a in one go kind of thing. She has some beautiful ideas about how to do this. I'm going to skip over them right now, but read them later. I also want to say in general that that book, Thinking in System, it's very dense, but I found it very interesting and one of the coolest things I've ever read in my whole life, even if it uses a lot of capitalist language and so on. Here's a simplified version of what she writes in the book. So she calls intervening places for a system, she calls them leverage points. And so this in a way is the iceberg, but then flipped in another way. So you have a system, it contains of events, there's behaviors that shape events, there's elements that shape behaviors, there's interrelationships, even function and purpose. Oh, let me go that way, and paradigms and mindsets at the top. Very theoretical, right? So here is an example, and I'm going to call this one Systems Thinking with Rosalie because I made this picture myself, and I obviously did not do as good a job as all the people that do this professionally. But here you see, I've called it stereotypical organization. So this is a model that also can be a government. It also can be many different things, but let's start at organization just because most of us have interacted with them on every level. So an organization has a director, it has a management layer, then it has some people who work at desks, and in the most stereotypical sense, the same organization also has some people that work with their hands, right? Whether that is planting trees or working in a factory. These tend to be the people in the organization. And I put them in a pyramid on purpose because we tend to think of these people as a hierarchy, right? So this is the stereotype. Now, if we want to intervene in this system, I'm going to show you some different points where we could. Academia, if I had to say where they are in the system, I have placed them over here. Academics are really good at looking at systems from the outside, like really, really zooming out, and then really thinking critically and nuanced about how systems could be different and what is not working in the current system and so on. But they tend to only write for other academics, which makes it their interaction with the rest of the system less direct than some other people, right? Then you can also do activism. This is possible. Activism also tends to be outside of the system. As an example that came to my mind when I was making this is there's in Amsterdam, I don't know if you all have a similar movement, but there are some vegan activists in Amsterdam who sometimes stand on a square in the middle of the city and they put tape over their mouths and they have a laptop that they're holding and then they're showing like horrible things that happen to animals in the bio industry. And so their aim is to shock other people into behavioral change, right? They're going like all the way outside the system and showing you this is crazy. You're meant to start thinking that something that you conceived of as normal before is really crazy and you should not be doing it anymore and you should change all your behavior in one day. I place them lower and nearer to the desk workers and people who work with their hands because activists tend to speak more directly to the common people, right? They tend to not always speak to directors and people in power. They tend to speak to us, wanting us to change our behaviors, hoping that from the ground up it will change the behavior of the system. They are also more directly, they are nearer to the system than academia in some ways because more people can hear what they are saying because of the language that they use. But from inside the system, there are also some things you could do. Like you could listen to the workers who work with their hands and use whatever their complaints are to make policy that would then change their complaints. So you could, like, maybe the workers have like very uncomfortable uniforms and nobody in the system is listening to them. And you could go listen to them and say, oh, they have really uncomfortable uniforms. So I'm going to propose to the director and the management that they change the uniforms. That would be a way you can intervene in a system, right? Another way is through user testing. Stereotypical organization presumably makes a product or a process or a service. We don't know, it's stereotypical. And so you can test whether that product or service really works for people. And so we're half in, half out, because then you're giving feedback into the organization what needs to change about the product or service. You could also do consultancy. Something that consultants are able to do is not always, but we're stereotyping here. Consultants can actually directly report to the management. So they can write a report about what's wrong and how everything should be pivoted and changed. So I've kind of placed them in between the desk workers and the management. And you can also do strategy. Now, if you're doing strategy, you might be even in the management layer of stereotypical organization. And you're actually setting out like we're supposed to go this way or that way instead of where we currently are. So these are all places where you could be intervening in a system. Now, I want to say one more complicated thing, and then I'm going to make it more concrete, I promise. There's this model that I recently found, and it's called the Stacy Matrix. And you can read it also in the longer presentation, but it's really fascinating because it helps to decide what kind of process you should use in decision making. So you have on the horizontal, you have certainty on the left, like we are very certain what needs to happen, what is the process that needs to happen, or very far from certainty, away from the 0 point. And then on the vertical axis, at the bottom, you have close to agreement. So we're also kind of, everybody's kind of aligned on what we should be doing, or you could be really far from agreement. And so you see that in these different places, decision making will take different shapes. So study it because it helps you understand what's happening around you and how you can intervene into it. It's also cool to say that this also tends to correspond to different processes of organizing work. So in that light blue corner, we're usually speaking about waterfall management processes. These are project management processes where there's very clear structures about how projects are supposed to take place. Imagine like a data process that can be quite straightforward. Paying people salaries tends to be a waterfall type of project management because it needs to happen every month in the same way. Because if you don't pay the salaries, the people tend to not show up for work, right? Then in the green and red parts of the matrix, people more often use like agile processes. In the purple, we're talking about Scrum. And then in the beige over there, we're talking about design thinking and other types of things that are really good at thinking at the edge of what we're currently doing and really thinking in the innovative space. All of these places have their advantage, and all of these processes can be intervened upon. But it's helpful to know what kind of processes they are. Okay, let me take a sip of my tea. And I give you a very concrete example of one time that I did this without knowing I was doing it when I was younger. And that in hindsight, I was intervening in a system. I used to work at the strategy department of a housing association in Amsterdam and as a junior strategist. And so it was now my job to make policy or something. And I didn't really know how to do that, but I was trying my best. And there are social housing, rent controlled housing in Amsterdam, as I'm sure is true in many, many cities around the world, is very scarce. The current wait list in Amsterdam is 16 years, but there are groups of people who don't have to wait. So there are people who, when they turn 18, immediately get a house. And that is, for example, because they have lost both of their parents or because they are no longer in touch with their parent. Maybe their parent went to prison. There's some reason why they can't stay at home. And in some of these cases, these people get a house immediately from the system. And so this is really great. And the people in the housing association tend to think of these youths as the lucky ones. They're like the lucky bastards because they don't have to wait for 16 years. So that's what I was told in there. And then I was also volunteering with people on the outside. And I was volunteering with youths who had had an experience of homelessness. And when I told them, because I came there for this group dinner and they were like, what do you do? And so I told them I work at the housing association and they all told me, oh, I got one of those houses, but then I lost it. And that's when I had my experience of homelessness. So I thought, shit, what's happening here? You know, these people are considered like the lucky ones, but that's not their experience at all. So I convinced my boss to do an event. And I could only pull off one focus group, honestly, because my boss didn't really see the point of it. And I was like, can I please have one focus group? And she said, okay. So I hired, I rented a nice venue. We even, I can show you some pictures here. We did it even on the roof of a hotel, beautiful view. We gave people mini hamburgers and like order whatever you want to attract people to come to this event. And then we were able to speak with them at the event about their experiences. Well, I also hired an extremely good facilitator to help make them feel safe and bring it out. And so this was the first part was a conversation just with the youths about their experiences. And then the second part was a conversation where the youths were sitting at the center and the professionals were sitting on the outskirts on chairs around in a circle, and their job was just to listen to the youths and the facilitator assisting the youths in bringing out their stories. And after this event, my company changed their policy that I was working for But on purpose, I invited people from healthcare, people from the municipality, people from the schooling system, like all sorts of people to come and listen. And some of them also changed their policy. And so I actually felt really bad about this afterwards because I thought this is not real research. And I think now that I look back on it, I think, yeah, but it was a real intervention. And so this is my example of concreteness, but it's also my teaser because I'm really interested in your reactions. What do you think? Do you think we can change systems? And also a question to get you, what is a system you would like to change? Now, I'm gonna preface this and say the academic system, let's not talk about it. We have talked enough about it. There's a lot of precarity there. But this is what almost every single conference for anthropologists is about. This is the Applied Anthropology Network career path. So let's hear about all the other steps for precarity inside academia.
So Keshav asked he would like you to share how you convinced your stakeholders for putting money on the focus group, and yeah, did you use any specific tools or arguments kind of to convince them about it?
Well, I was working there, so this was my direct manager who I had to convince. So just like in any job, there was just an exchange, like I'll write you this boring report if you give me this focus group kind of thing.
And there was also a question about from Magna, which part of hierarchy do anthropologists operate in?
So the point I was trying to make was that in any of these places, you can intervene in a system. And so I would say any of these places an anthropologist could find their home. But we're going to be more concretely speaking about job titles in the second part.
Hi. So your pyramid, I was actually reflecting on my own practice. I'm not an anthropologist, but I consider myself doing autoethnography in my work. So I was in academia, and now I also founded my own organization, and I see myself as representing both the working class and also the think tank class. So a more parallel two-side brain.
Okay. What's your question, or are you disagreeing?
So no, I'm about your triangle, the hierarchy and how you place yourself.
How I would place myself?
No, well, you showed this organization structure and how anthropologists fall, in the different roles. So I'm just sharing my experience. It can be like a parallel where you are also working class plus also the think tank class. Like you can have all of those in one
Right.
person too.
Yeah, of course. But I don't think I was implying that anything here says anything about a person. I'm only speaking about roles that we can take in a system, right? So I think that's an important distinction to make because I did not mean to imply that everybody at the bottom of the pyramid is a working class person and everybody at the top is an elite, right? This is almost like I drew a stereotypical organization, but you can imagine any organization tends to have these parts. So even I would say in very small organizations, it can still sometimes you can still consider them a little system, right? Maybe they don't have all the parts, which at the same time, you can also think about like a country as a system, right? That can follow the rules of the pyramid that I drew. Which is it's just a model to think with. But I see your point. Like there's obviously very, very many places where we can sit in a system. And yeah, many creative ones too. And that can also be very challenging to a system, like showing its um, concepts or ideas that maybe nobody else in the system has. Um, so yeah, maybe you fit on all of the parts of the pyramid with your organization.
Someone in the chat, there's two nice examples of people talking about the systems that they would like to change.
Yeah, I saw
So
it.
Nina shared that oh, did you see it? That she's currently trying to work on changing the healthcare system in Bulgaria. And Paola, who is trying to change the educational system around sexual education in Sicily or Italy in general. So people are doing the work.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love to see that. And I'm also just here to celebrate it, you know, all these different types of work that applied anthropologists do. Um, shall I shall I move on? What do you think?
If there's time, there's one more question. If not, we can also take it
Oh,
after.
let's do it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Ben asked, he said, I've been working in the grassroots music industry for a couple of years, and he's curious about how anthropology can support bottom-up community arts projects to contend them on a market dominated by massive multinationals. Yeah, it would be interesting if you or anyone here has experience with that.
Yeah. Um, I mean, the answer, Ben, is in a million ways. And all roles in the system would have a different um, uh, timeline for effect, right? Because I don't think that one part is effective and the other part isn't. I think whether you're doing like the user testing or the listening to the workers, whether you're creating the art or the activism or the academic work that is showing the system a mirror to itself from the outside, I think all of these parts are interplaying with one another and supporting each other towards system change. Like system change happens in a million tiny instances over time, right? Like an example of that is that I like to give is like when I was much younger, I decided to become a vegetarian. And a lot of my family members who are nurses were telling me that I was going to get some deficiencies in food. And then 10 years later, these same family members told me, yeah, we now eat vegetarian dinner like 3 times a week in my house. And so it's an example of how the mainstream ideas about a certain way of being changed in a very rapid space actually because it's 10 years, you know, that's not a lot of time on like a zoomed out scale of humanity. And I think that the way that that happened is that activists stood on the square and other people like made it possible for the municipality lunch to be vegetarian, and other people created a recipe book, and other people did this and other people did that, and all together that changed the opinion of people on something, right? So I think they're all helpful. That's kind of my point. I
Yeah.
also see Bianca's question, but I propose for that one we go to the second part. What do you think?
I I think maybe Jonathan's question is still part of this
Oh,
part, but
sorry,
because he said he's
Jonathan.
currently working at like the lower end of the hierarchy in the government organization, yet he believes he could do an ethnographic study on the systems and office culture that could be helpful. So how do you have any recommendations on how to kind of pitch that or bring it up with the management?
Well, I would find a friend in the organization. And if you don't have a friend in an organization, then you have and by a friend, I mean somebody who has more power than you, who likes you personally, because this is going to be a controversial idea and they're going to need to put some faith and trust in you. And then you're going to need to negotiate with them. Like maybe they need to see drafts before it becomes more public, or, you know, something to make them feel secure about your idea, that you're not trying to ruin the organization. If you don't have that, you can also just write an expose piece. Maybe the government agency where you work is horrible, and maybe people need to know about it, and maybe you will gather data for a year and then approach a journalistic output place and expose how horrible it is. Either way, you would be contributing to changing the system. And you can also do what Zarina says, you can also write an academic paper. Okay, I see that people are ready for the second half because people are asking specific jobs. So let's do that. It's about 10 minutes, and then we have more time for reactions also about this, huh? Let me share my screen again. And thank you everyone for sharing and asking. It's really appreciated. I hope you keep it up. All right. The more concrete part. The following slides were produced, I was like also presented, but also produced in the context of a course that we were able to develop together with a university from Czech Republic, University of Pardubice. And you see all of us smiling with our funding flag from our Czech place where we had the course. And this is all the participants of the course as well. The goal of this course was to simulate the reality of working as an applied anthropologist, but we also infused it with certain types of theory. And so you will see some of the slides from that course right now. And I'm going to start with a couple of slides that were developed by my co-teacher, who is a marketing specialist, who worked in marketing and strategy for 15 years, because she has an inside view on business that I could have never gathered because I've only worked in the NGO and government sector. So here are some industries. We're just listing them. Industries that you may have heard of, right? Very common industries in most economies. And you can look at the business world this way, right? In terms of industry. But let me reorganize it. You can also look at it like this. So on the left, you have corporations and brands. We just listed some famous ones here. But whether they are like idealist or not idealist, they are corporations and brands. Then in the middle, you see research and insight firms. Firms like Ipsos or Fieldwork do qualitative research or produce reports for trends and data that other companies buy, and that's how they make their money. Or, yeah, usually other supports them. That's how money. And then on the right, you see consulting and agencies. So consultants tend to come in from the outside and give some advice where the next place to go should be for a company. And so here are some roles in each of these that actually use ethnography already today. Like all the people working in these jobs use ethnography in their job. I'm not going to go through all of them because I think you should look this up in the longer one, and you can look for all of these roles on Google or LinkedIn or whatever and see what vacancies are out there. What I would like to point out is that there is a difference here between you have the corporations and the brands. There we tend to have people working there who tend to be generalists. They are able to do a lot of different things. So they know a little bit about ethnography, but really not as much as most people in this audience do. They tend to kind of hop around in business jobs. And then the people in this other two, in the research and consulting, that's usually where deep experts on any topic sit. And so that's also where you can potentially get more time to research something deeply, and you can be paid to do research even in a business setting or an organizational setting, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you are only selling products. There's many other options, including in innovation and design and coming up with better ways that the world should be organized. Sometimes corporations and brands also hire these deep experts because then they want them to be in-house. That tends to be a bit later in the career, though, that you can space for yourself in like 10 years of consultancy on your CV before you can pull that off. Lastly, there are, of course, the big consultancies that you saw on the previous slide, but there are also really small ones. Like I worked for 4 years at a consultancy, and it was 20 social scientists advising the Dutch government on housing. And so we had like statistic experts and different types of experts, urban planning experts, and so on. And we sold our services to government agencies. So it's also not all as corporate as you may imagine or as commercial as you may imagine. This is also one that you may want to study a bit later, so I'm going to skip through it very quickly now. But like earlier, I was showing you the Stacy matrix where I was talking about projects and different ways to organize processes. You see here that a project starts with a brief and then it goes around like this. And so just to say now that the gray ones, business problem identification and analysis and learnings at the end, tend to contain longer and deeper research. And then the orange ones tend to be more user research. So that can be helpful in understanding what a job description actually means that you are reading. I also want to tell you a little bit about ethnography in NGOs and governments from my own experience. It's a bit harder there to speak. I saw somebody put their hand, but I'm going to run through this here first, and then we'll have a discussion and Q&A time. There are, what was I saying? Oh yeah, it's a bit harder for me to write like job titles, and that's because NGOs and governments tend to operate in a local language, and so they're going to be called something in the language of the country that you live in, but there are generally 3 fields, so I just want to show those to you. There's a policy and strategy field. Ethnography there is done to check like what way is the policy on, does it need adjustment? Sometimes there is statistics used for this instead. However, I have seen some processes where the amount of money that was spent on expensive statistical models, it would have been way more efficient to do a rapid ethnography. This is not yet everywhere known, though. So some managers cannot be convinced of that reality. Another place where ethnography is used is on the street level, in quotation marks, in the neighborhood, at the call center, at the front desk, where street level bureaucrats, and I'm going to use the term here from literature, operate. Anybody basically who interacts with citizens or who interacts with customers. In the case of semi-government stuff or NGOs, sometimes they call them customers, citizens. The people who are working in the neighborhood and at the desk do almost continuous ethnography because they are talking to people all the time. And in organizations with the right political climate, and I don't mean politics as a worldwide thing, but I mean the politics of internal play and who has power and how the hierarchy sits, the insights from this street level should be able to go up the tree. And you can look for this when you go to a job interview and if you see an idea box somewhere, you ask someone in passing like, what is being done with that one? Like, how often is it emptied? Because that will tell you something about how much things go up the tree and how much effect it would have to work on this street level. The third one is developing solutions. This is where Namla's courses sit. We develop solutions and products and services, and we teach a methodology for that called design thinking, but there are many methodologies to do for that. Because developing new ways forward for a system can sometimes require this connection between the policy and the street level. So an understanding of whatever was designed on the policy level, how it really works out on the street level, and then being able to communicate that back to the management level. And so that's also where ethnography can play a very crucial role. I'm going to go through a couple of things now very rapidly, and you can read them later. We've compiled for you a business methodology lexicon. They have in business something called an in-depth interview. It's an interview. They call it in-depth, but it's the same. In international business, they tend to refer to it as an IDI, but it's the same thing. It's an interview. The only thing is that they think 30 minutes is very long. So you might need to adjust your expectations if that's the kind of place you want to work in. Another thing is mobile ethnography is another way to do research. Mobile platforms like Dscout. I actually signed up for Dscout last year and took part in a bunch of research because I was just really curious. And so I just joined as a participant. Then you have to take these like 1-minute videos of yourself talking about a thing. Some businesses really like this because you get beautiful visuals for your presentation that you can give to your boss. And it's also quite fun to take part in it. And also sometimes you get like $10 for taking part. So it can be quite nice. There's also digital diaries. They are very similar to mobile ethnography, but they also, they can be a bit longer, like maybe even like 4 weeks or 6 weeks. And then the app like sends you a push notification, like do another exercise. And they can also include engagement between participants, which can be a really fun way to gather data in a way that is also really fun for participants. Then you have follow-alongs or day in the life. They can focus on a specific exterior experience, like they're following this man who is buying apples and looking at the apples. And then they're asking him questions like, why are you looking at both of the apples? And how do you feel about the apples? And that will help them make better apples in the future. Also good to know that even a day in the life, some people do it for 1 hour only. And so I would then argue, if you were in this situation, that you need 6 hours across 2 days, and you need a videographer, and you need 2 weeks to analyze the footage to get the most out of that situation. Then there are focus groups. In business, they are known as very classic and old school. And some marketeers still use them all the time, but others only use them at the beginning of the process or the end. And you need a really good moderator. Otherwise, you get group think. And you will find in the world of organizations, there are some really good moderators, and they are really cool. You should always hire them, because then you can learn a lot of stuff from them. Lastly, I'm going to kind of end with something general. When you're outside of academia, a bit more in general, people are always going to ask you this question. You did research, so what? And to some of us, including myself when I was younger, that can sound almost like offensive, right? Like, what do you mean? My research is really important. And so it's helpful to realize that research always is in service of decisions that need to be made. Because inside academia, not a lot of decisions have to be made, but outside, a lot of decisions have to be made all the time by governments and by companies about what to do and what not to do. And this is simply a part of that reality. So these people who you are presenting your research to, they always want to know, like, what do I do now? Like, you did this research, and now what? What is the next step? How can we action this? And so you tend to do presentations that are about insights. Insights is not all your research, it is only what they need to know. Then you have recommendations, why you think we should go a certain way, your rationale, your pros and cons, And then the so what is the decision that your manager or your client or your stakeholder is going to make on the basis of your research. And yeah, it's kind of helpful. Then we can change systems. All right. I put a little QR code here for our website, but I'm also going to end this so that I can see you all because I would love to hear. Oh, yeah, hang on. I'm going to stop the sharing. So now I can see all your faces and I can see if you have any questions. There's many in the chat too, right?
Yes, I think some you might have already answered while you were speaking, but there was one previously. Wait, let me scroll up to it again. I mean, you talked a bit about this now at the end, a little bit, but Serena was wondering kind of like if you do more like ethnography in the corporate business, what do you do with the results? Like, what form can this take? Could you maybe talk a little bit more about that?
I can give you a recommendation. There's a book by Sam Ladner called Practical Ethnography, and it's actually relatively old. It's from 2014, and it has a whole chapter on types of presentations. And I still find it a really useful resource for different ways you can shape your presentation.
Then someone was asking about where you would place policy advisor. I think that was on the slides where it kind of showed the different potential jobs in the different fields.
Yeah, where I would place it, but I have not made the structure of the other organization, so that's up to them where they place it. But in every system, somewhere sits the role of policy advisor, but in every system that will be in a slightly different place because the organization of organizations is actually highly political and not has doesn't have a lot always to do with what is the most efficient or the most logical way to do it. And by political, I mean, again, internal politics, like how people make friends and how hierarchies work.
And then there was a question by Fontip, which like she's interested in innovation development and policy advocacy and feels like those are very separate. And if you either know specific roles or have just general maybe tips on how to approach it if you're interested in two areas or sectors that might not be combined yet, and yeah, how to approach that.
Yeah. Mm, I think I would give you different advice based on where you are in your career. But if I'm assuming that you just started, I would advise you to get a job in one of them and to just learn in that job. And then, I think it's also good to realize that, like, in any job in the beginning, they're just going to tell you to take notes and do the things and learn all the things, how the organization works. And after like one or two, you can have those kinds of things. Am I back? Sorry. I don't know why the internet is doing this. It was perfect all
That's
day.
okay, you're lagging a little bit, but you're here.
Okay. Yeah, so like after a few years, you always have more options to advocate for new roles in an organization and so on. So, yeah, I would advise you to take a long view on it and see what leeway you can create in a system over time.
And I also shared it in the chat, and you can find it online as well. We had a workshop recently with the Anthropology Career Readiness Network about
Yeah, with Val.
exploring opportunities in different domains and sectors. So that might also be helpful to some of the people that are here that weren't at that workshop.
Yeah, that's a really good one because I watched that one too, and it's very concrete advice how to Google specific things and find specific jobs.
Then there's a conversation going on and a question as well about if a bachelor's degree in anthropology is enough of a qualification, or if you have enough experience conducting qualitative research, or if it's always necessary to get more training or qualification.
Yeah, but then my question would be enough qualified for what? Like enough qualified for a junior position? Yes. Enough qualified for a CEO position? Maybe not, right? So I think like the thing to realize is that like when you enter the working world in a way, you start at the bottom of some pyramids and hierarchies, And you will learn so many things about how organizations work and all these things. And these things you don't know. You kind of have to embody that experience to start understanding how they are. So I think definitely you need, you have enough experience to get a junior position and to see if there you get to do more ethnography. Um, hopefully.
And there's a question by Tatani Ranjan, which kind of comes from the other side. He says, how as a teacher in a classroom should I begin to teach students to start interventions in the system? Do you have any good strategies to kind of help with that?
Yeah, it's a really fair question. I don't know. I don't know. You can send them this lecture. Um, I think part of my hesitation is that I've been building a business on actually teaching that from a business perspective for 5 years. So I have so many thoughts about that. I couldn't say it in 5 minutes. So that's why I'm kind of hesitating. I think a great place to start is to look for local NGOs that have a question that they don't know how to answer, and maybe you can design a project with the students and the questioners around that. And there is a bunch of nice literature on this also with examples how to do this, which I can look up later because I don't know by heart the authors right now.
Then maybe one more question from the chat, but I also see that people have their hand raised. Marina has shared that she struggled in the NGO sector as an anthropologist, that work is not as deep or maybe not as important as research work would be. Is that also your
Right.
experience?
Yeah, it can be tricky. I mean, the NGO world can be a place where the budgets are really tight and everybody is overworked and underpaid, and there is a lot of work to do, right? Depending on what kind of NGO you're working in. But if you're working with something that is very directly trying to help a group of people, yeah, that can be a difficult place to argue for more research, which sometimes is also really understandable, right? Like, I think the main lesson that I learned from working in housing is that more research isn't always good. Like, sometimes you need to just start a solution and then see if it works and then try another one. Because, I mean, I don't know, like in university, I learned to think about everything for like a year before I say anything. But then when I was a junior policy advisor, people came to me with questions such as, this person is sleeping under a bridge tonight and we need to find a solution as fast as possible. And that person is not helped by me thinking about it for a year, how they're sleeping under a bridge. It's not going to change their situation whatsoever. And so sometimes we might need to just actually try something and be honest and say, like, we don't know what we're doing, but we found you a bed and maybe it works and maybe it doesn't work. And otherwise tomorrow we'll find another one, you know? And so maybe that is a way to go about things in the NGO sector. And maybe if you want to research, then you may not find it in that sector. It depends. But I also don't think all ethnography is research. I think using your anthropological skills, like applying empathy to situations and being able to listen to the person sleeping under the bridge and the manager with the same amount of patience and respect is something that you learned in anthropology class. And so that might make you better at that job than somebody else who maybe has an engineering background. I don't know, right? Like, in organizations, there's also very many complex human situations with lots of interests that can also act as translators in. And so I don't know if we should always aspire to a job where we get to do research, because maybe there are other jobs where our talents are also needed. But that's very individual, obviously.
There was
Yeah.
also a question maybe about other resources that you think could be helpful, but yeah, maybe that's something you can think about after. We will make sure to include it on the Padlet as well as in the description on YouTube once we upload the recording, which will be shared
Yeah.
with all of you as well that registered via email.
Well, I would say definitely, just like you were saying, Olivia, the Acorn sources are really great, I think. And there are some books out there, Anthropologist Wanted, written by some Dutch people. There's another one called Why the World Needs Anthropologists, and they're doing the second edition later this year. You know, there are a bunch of books also that are trying to explore applied anthropology from um, different points of view. And yeah, and even in academic literature, there's more and more books about business anthropology and articles and so on. And so I would say, yeah, Google and see what you can find. There's not a lot, but everything that's there tends to be quite good, at least in my experience.
Thank you so much, Rosalie, for today and for this really interesting presentation and conversation. As always, please, have everyone that joined, feel free to leave your thoughts and comments on today's events in the feedback form. It's also linked in the chat as well as on Padlet. Our upcoming events, we have some more workshops coming up in collaboration with Acorn, the Anthropology Career Readiness Network. The next one is on April 23rd already, and it's about setting up and conducting informational interviews. You can register now, link is also in the chat and on Ticketailor. And if you have any ideas for topics or questions for upcoming events, feel free to leave them on Padlet. You can watch the recordings of all of the previous workshops and events on YouTube. And if you want to learn more about AEN and what we do, feel free to check out our website and follow us on our socials. And yeah, we hope to see you next time. Thank you so much for joining. Have a good rest of your days. Bye.